great state of Pennsylvania.
We're back here at the Republican convention in Cleveland, which you can hear behind me, with the Wall Street Journal columnist Kim Strassel, who is the new book out, The Intimidation Game: How the Left is Silencing Free Speech. Ben Domenech is the publisher of The Federalist, and Matt Schlapp is the chairman of the American Conservative Union. Kim, let me start with you. Mike Pence is now on the ticket. What does that mean?
It's a good thing for Donald Trump in general. This is a guy who's been in Washington, so he's respected by a lot of the leaders that Donald Trump still needs to reassure out there. He is an evangelical Christian. This is a community that Donald Trump really needs to get to come out and vote for him this fall. He's a policy guy, ran the Republican Study Committee, which is something that's really valued by a lot of people out there who care about conservative policy. And he's just an articulate guy as well, too. He's going to be good for getting across Donald Trump's message.
Ben, a lot of the people I talk to go through that list of qualifications and note that that's quite different than Donald Trump. So is this a sign of the breadth of the Republican coalition, or is it a match that might have some difficulty staying together?
I think it's an attempt on the part of the Trump campaign to really normalize him as a candidate, and it's a direct geographic play to compete in the Midwest. I think that Mike Pence is the kind of candidate who's going to help out in some of these Midwestern states where Donald Trump is more competitive than perhaps other Republicans have been. The problem for him is that he is another white guy, a Christian conservative, kind of an old school Republican, Bush era kind of conservative, who may not have enough appeal to help Donald Trump compete in a state like Florida, which could prove more challenging for him.
What do you think about that, Matt? I mean, I talked to one activist in the party, Republican Party, who said they doubled down on white guys with this pick. What does that mean in terms of the map, in terms of outreach, and how the ticket's going to compete in those states we all are so familiar with?
This is one of the ways in which Donald Trump is unconventional. You usually pander to voters. You say, oh, here's where we're demographically weak, so we'll try to make demographic improvements on the ticket. And instead he said, who is the vice president I need to be an effective president? Who can help me kind of go through the Washington dysfunction and try to make sense of it? And who's someone who's got enough government experience, including as an executive, to make the kind of change I want to make? So, yeah, you can look at all the ways on the optics that it might not be perfect, but it's a home run in every other way, and he's going to come out of this convention with conservatives and Republicans behind him like they've never been before.
Ben, Paul Manafort wouldn't buy this idea, but a lot of the people I've talked to keep using the word stabilize, as if the nominee is a volatile mixture and needs a drop of something to. So it's not so much what Mike Pence may do in office, as Matt's points are taken, but it's that he is a signal that Donald Trump has listened to those who've been advising him and saying, we need something a little more solid in the ticket, not something so volatile.
Perhaps he has. I think the problem for him with this Pence pick, though, is that if he hopes to completely lock down people who had objections to Trump within the party, I'm not sure the Pence pick is going to do that. He's normalizing to a certain degree, but for those who have been resistant to Trump to this point, Paul Manafort is very familiar with crushing rebellions of all kinds. And I think in this context, there are a lot of people who still don't like Donald Trump, and even picking someone like Mike Pence is not going to bring them back onto the Republican wagon this time around, particularly swing voters and independents who he needs to appeal to.
Yeah, only Donald Trump can do that, and I think that that's the thing that the Trump campaign still needs to understand. You look out there, he's unified behind him about 75% of the Republican Party. You need it to be above 90. And Mike Pence is going to help with that a little bit. But that's what this week is going to have to be about for the Trump campaign, is him standing up there on stage saying, I want your vote. I'm going to reassure you on these things and these things and these things. Maybe it's just a question, too, of saying you need to vote for me because we can't afford to have Hillary Clinton president. But whatever that message is, it's got to be where he can get up to that 90%. And then, by the way, he could be in an interesting position because he has pulled a lot of people from outside the party in as well, too, that are behind him.
John.
But this is unification.
John, if I could just say, I have people on the board, of which I'm the chairman, who have called me since the Pence pick, who were in the never Trump kind of camp. And they've said, this reassures me enough, not only to support Donald Trump, some of them are getting on airplanes and coming here. I've talked to conservatives across the country, but this is exactly the type of pick that they wanted to see him make, because he's keeping the trust with those primary voters when he said, I'm going to govern on these conservative values. So I have anecdotal evidence that this is happening across the country.
The Mike Pence pick does not change the fact that the Republican Party is now the party of Donald Trump. 150 years ago, this party was begun by Abraham Lincoln on the idea that constitutional rights were not bound by race or creed, that the American eagle's wings were broad enough to accept all who would come here. Now this party is coming to Cleveland to die. This is not the party of Abraham Lincoln anymore. It is the party of Donald Trump. It has traded statesmanship for xenophobia. It has traded free markets for protectionism. It has traded the higher principles of our better angels for the belief in party identity politics. That is why they are getting 0% of the black vote in Pennsylvania. That is why you're going to continue to see this kind of race-baiting approach to politics. I think it's completely true that this is the end of the party of Lincoln.
Let me just say, this is the very type of elite Washington judgment that the voters in the Republican, let me finish. That the voters across this country are sick and tired of, not just Republicans, a lot of union voters, a lot of independent voters. They believe that when you tell them, these people who voted for Donald Trump in record numbers, when you call them racist or xenophobic, let me finish. When you say that they're race baiting or responding to those policies, you're judging them. And these are voters who have given him more votes than any Republican has run for office. I refuse to believe that those Republican activists and those conservative activists are racist and that they're ill-intended. They love their country and they simply want to take it back.
They are desperate for change. They are desperate for something different than the elites who have failed them for far too long. But they have turned in their desperation to a man who they don't fully understand and who is not going to deliver on his promises because he's taking us away from the principle that actually.
Great state of South Dakota.
So, Kim, do you have a way to adjudicate this debate?
Look, I think you have to make a distinction between the party and a man who's leading the somewhat controversial head of the party at the moment. In terms of the party, the Republican Party has always been a very dynamic and fluid entity that has a lot of changes and ebbs and flows in it. And I think what we're seeing again is some more changes out there. Donald Trump, again, he's going to have to try to unify some of this.
But, and Matt, back to Ben's point, though, and what I was talking about with the earlier guests. I mean, Senator Rubio isn't here, Susana Martinez, and Governor Nikki Haley. These are not elitists. These are people from in the states. They are governors. They used to be the farm team of the Republican Party. The farm team is not here. That seems to be a tension that needs to be explained.
I'm not going to spin you on this. I'm not going to tell you, oh, don't look at that. That doesn't mean anything. It does mean something. The fact is, Donald Trump has not always been a Republican. He's a recent Republican. There's no question that he comes from outside the party, and he's taking on these elected officials who have been in power. And of course they're unhappy with it. It makes them uncomfortable. It makes a lot of people uncomfortable who are the party regulars who have been running these conventions every 4 years. And we shouldn't be surprised that that's happening. And here's the fact. What's going on in Republicans and conservatives' minds is this. They don't have to be for 100% of what Trump's for. They just have to be for 60% of what Trump's for. And that's the fight that's going inside all these voters' heads. And what they're going to see this week is going to tip it over that 50% mark. And you're going to come out of here with more Republicans and more conservatives. It might not be 90, 92%, but it's going to be right in that vicinity. And it's going to be enough with all the independents and all the unions and all the Democratic voters he's going to pull over. It's going to be enough to win in November.
I think the question, though, is if there's 10% they absolutely cannot vote for. You see what I'm saying? Yeah, like 60% of what he stands for. But if there's something that's just a deal breaker for them, then that's still a problem.
Do you think there is a deal breaker?
I think that for some Republicans out there still is a deal breaker, just with his personality, which is why this moment is so important for him. He's going to have to stand up and ask. One thing you never really hear Donald Trump say is, I really want your vote.
Do you think, though, given the qualms that people have, you can fix it with a PR show, which is what everybody here admits this is? I mean, these are deep questions that have been raised tonight.
Conventions are always about an opportunity for a candidate to showcase who they are. And yeah, they're a bit staged, but this is about Donald Trump letting people know who he is.
Donald Trump is currently running about 10 to 12 percentage points behind Marco Rubio in Florida. That's the difference that he needs to close. He needs to get those voters to come back and be convinced that he will be a better president than Hillary Clinton.
All right. Thank you all very much for this spirited discussion. We'll see after a week's work where we all are on our positions, and we'll be right back. Security is a top concern here in Cleveland. We want to check in now with Cleveland Police Chief Calvin Williams. Chief Williams, give us a sense of the scope of the things that you're watching here on the eve of the convention.
Well, right now this morning, it's pretty quiet. There's a lot of movement around by our state, local, and federal partners to get things positioned for later on this evening. And the city right now, obviously, is pretty quiet. We expect things to pick up later on this afternoon.
In terms of various groups that might either be causing trouble or just having peaceful protests, can you give us a sense of how many you're watching?
We're not actually watching any particular group. There have been approximately 4 or 5 groups that have signed up to actually do our official parade route. We've had impromptu parade marches or protest marches probably for about the last 5 or 6 days. We actually had one yesterday afternoon with a group that was voicing their First Amendment concerns, and we expect to have them throughout the convention, whether they're scheduled or impromptu.
There have been reports that anarchists are thinking about causing trouble here in Cleveland. Have you heard any of that or any sense of that?
Well, we've heard reports from different sources about everyone from anarchists to black separatists to just regular Trump followers, anti-Trump followers. I mean, everybody has been in some way, shape, or form touted as coming to Cleveland to either cause trouble or to exercise their First Amendment rights, but we're prepared for it all.
The open carry firearm law, does that pose a particular challenge here in Cleveland?
Well, there's always a challenge when firearms and the public kind of mesh together, but we've had open carry scenarios in the city before, and we've handled them. We plan to handle them the same way as we always have. Of course, we've ramped that up a little as far as our technique and our tactics to handle them. But in this state, everyone has the right to open carry, and we want to make sure people do that safely.
Have you changed anything in your tactics in response to the attack in Nice, France?
Somewhat. We've placed barriers or barricades at certain key streets and intersections around the downtown neighborhood, just to make sure that things like that transpired in Nice are thwarted here in Cleveland if they're attempted, or at least mitigated. So, things that happen around the country and around the world do affect, to some degree, how we respond here in Cleveland.
How did the attacks on police officers in Dallas affect the way you're responding here in Cleveland?
Although tragic in Dallas, it didn't affect our overall plan a whole lot. We always plan for every eventuality. And a scenario, unfortunately, like Dallas, we already had in our plans, although we did maybe up some of the resources dedicated to those scenarios in the plan after Dallas.
All right. Thank you so much, Chief Williams, for being with us. Good luck, and we'll be back in a moment. There's also breaking news this morning as we're getting reports that multiple officers have been shot in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. That's the city where Alton Sterling, a young black man, was killed outside a convenience store 10 days ago by a police officer. And we're back here in Cleveland now with Peggy Noonan, who is a CBS News contributor and columnist for the Wall Street Journal. The man next to her needs no introduction, but we note that this is his 25th convention. And we're happy to have you here, Bob, especially in this moment of breaking news, and Ed O'Keefe, who covers politics for the Washington Post. Bob, I want to start with you. We've just had this report of officers shot in Baton Rouge. React to that, but also this political campaign continues to have interruptions by violence or terrorism. We're here, it's happened again. What's your thoughts?
Well, I mean, this is a nation on edge, John. This is a city on edge here in Ohio. This is a political party that's on edge. Last night, several of us were having dinner down by the lake. A group of Cleveland police officers came by on bicycles. There must have been 50 of them. As they passed by the restaurant, everyone stood up as one and gave them a round of applause. That tells you what's on people's minds these days and where this country is these days. I think that all of us who are here to cover this are hoping that this story is going to be inside this convention hall. and not outside. But right now, that's just one more unanswered questions in a convention that seems to me to be about unanswered questions.
Peggy, you at one point had the job of taking big national moments that interrupted and giving voice to a president who had to talk about them. Candidates here have to come up with something to say to address this, but we're in a political campaign where the instinct is often to heighten people's anxieties, to make them afraid of the other candidate. Perhaps the race we've got is one in which that's more the case than ever. What do these candidates do? Where does the conversation need to go if you're in politics right now?
Well, there will be no ignoring the story you just spoke of as the story emerges and the facts become clear. It's difficult. My first thought was that stories like this, like Dallas, like Nice, all of these stories of violence and sadness, which have been punctuating the news at almost a heightened pace, they somehow show the distance between enacted democracy in formal settings like this and a real world that is turbulent, full of turmoil, and wrinkling itself out in some new way. But I think this story that has happened may become something that will have to be dealt with, and in a very serious way, especially after Dallas, where we all experienced such trauma.
Ed, after Dallas, the shooting there, Donald Trump said he was the law and order candidate. He mentioned that again yesterday in his remarks, announcing Mike Pence as his running mate. What's your sense of the way the two candidates will speak to this moment? I'm thinking for the moment about Robert Kennedy when he announces in Indianapolis that Martin Luther King has been shot. I mean, that was a historic turning point. But he was there, the cameras were on him, and he spoke to an anguish in the country. What's your sense of how the two candidates will respond?
I think no matter what they say, John, it may be quickly forgotten. I mean, it was just this week that you saw President Obama and President Bush stand on a stage together in Dallas to commemorate that violence in Dallas. Do any of us really remember what was said? Do viewers even have a vivid recollection of that moment? Not necessarily, because the news and these moments move so quickly now. They bleed into each other. And it's very difficult to really have profound political moments. I've been struck, think about it. Friday night, a nearly deposed president goes on FaceTime to tell people to take to the streets. A few weeks ago, a woman live streamed the shooting of her boyfriend on Facebook, and that brought people to the streets. We're in this hall, which will be broadcast in all sorts of ways. And the format of this hasn't changed in a world that's changing so rapidly. And I just wonder if American political infrastructure is really rising to the moment and able to really resonate.
Well, one would hope that the words of the Dallas mayor, Mike Rollins, who said words matter, one would hope that would be the guiding philosophy of this convention. But the other part, John, is it's not going to take one news conference, it's not going to take one prayer service, it's not going to take one political convention to solve the problems that this country is immersed in at this point. If that's all it took, we would have solved it, because what was President Obama went to his 11th memorial service when he was down there in Dallas. Yeah. This is not about just making up some rules and say, well, okay, everything's fine now. It's going to go on for a while.
Can I note also, I am not certain the American people at this point are looking to the people speaking formally, the candidates, the party candidates right now for leadership in so much the way that they look at regular Americans forced into prominence, like David Brown, the police chief in Dallas, who came forward with common sense, heart, guts, and eloquence. It's funny, but the American people aren't looking to them right now. They're looking to the American people dealing with the trauma every day of what's happening in our country.
But should they be looking to their leaders, or are you saying they're not looking at them because they've cast them off? They've been ineffective?
I think something like that is happening. Look, I think this entire convention is, as Matt Schlapp said, in a way, a rebuke of Washington. I don't sense people are looking to Washington for moral and eloquent and meaningful leadership at these times anymore as much as they used to. And I suppose that would be another show why, but it is my sense of things. If we have a story breaking this morning, I don't think anybody's going to say, what did Mrs. Clinton say? Yeah. What did Trump say? but they're going to talk about what some other people said.
And tomorrow night, the opening night of this is going to be all about Secretary Clinton and Benghazi. Like that is the main focus of it. It's not going to be about why to vote for Donald Trump. It's going to be about why not to vote for Hillary Clinton. It comes at a time, we have post-ABC polling out this morning that shows that the two of them remain the most deeply unpopular presidential nominees in modern polling and probably American history. There's just no appetite for either of them. It's becoming an election about voting against the other person. No reason to believe they would tune in this week for
John,
answers.
what has happened here? I mean, we talk a lot about our roads and bridges collapsing and crumbling, but our political infrastructure, I think, is in worse shape right now than the roads and bridges in this country. People have lost confidence. They see the Congress come and go. They vote for one person or another. Nothing happens. We see people get up and run for president and they denounce one candidate or another, and then suddenly they get on the ticket perhaps, or they're trying to get on the ticket, and the nominee is a great guy. People have come to the conclusion that politicians will say and do anything, and they don't see it making much difference. I mean, the purpose of government is to improve the lives of our citizens, not to entertain us. And I think many people think that it's not doing that anymore. And that's why we are where we are.
And so, Peggy, given what Bob said and what you've said, which is nobody's looking to the platform here for answers, but isn't Donald Trump saying, I have the answers? I am the solution to the broken system that Bob talks about, the system that has people so disappointed and angry, and he's saying, I'm the fix. But you're
saying, I am the breakaway from what doesn't work. The question then arises, how will you make it work? What do you have in terms of political experience? We know there is none. But what do you have? What exactly do you want? How will you execute? I suspect there are a number of people who are wondering if he can execute on the things that he has done. Look, what I am struck by here in Cleveland is we're at the beginning of a convention. It hasn't quite begun yet, but it almost has. There is a sense of unsureness and anxiety. There are people trying very hard to say we are united and excited. There are people who almost have told me, frankly, we're in a barrel going over Niagara Falls. You know, at this point, just enjoy the ride. Here's who I'm waiting to meet. The fabulous Trump delegate who's never been to a convention before, who is on fire for his guy and who can make the case to me. I can't wait to meet that person.
All right, well, we've run out of time, so we'll have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you, and we'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you for watching. An update on that shooting. There are at least 2 police officers dead in that shooting in Baton Rouge. We will have more of that on our digital network, CBSN, and tonight on a special 1-hour edition of the evening news from here in Cleveland. For Face the Nation, I'm John Dickerson.